than 112,000 people of Japanese ancestry on the frightened West Coast. Most are American citizens by birth. Proven guilt, not even a proven military need. Yet respected public officials, the Army, the President of the United States, unite to imprison these fellow Americans without trial or hearing, and the Supreme Court approves. This is Walter Cronkite reporting. They are called Nisei. They are Americans. Their ancestors were Japanese. After Pearl Harbor, some spent World War II in internment camps in the United States, while at the same time others, sons and blood relatives, spent it fighting and dying in foxholes for the United States. Today we present this story, the Nisei, the pride and the shame. December 7th, 1941. 3 Japanese Americans remember that day.
It was Sunday. We were at home having breakfast, preparing to go to church. Then suddenly an announcer came over the morning hour and announced that the Japanese were bombing Pearl Harbor. I was then a member of the aid station, a civil defense unit, and soon thereafter we were in action. In fact, I had the unfortunate duty of picking up the first civilian dead on December the 7th.
On Pearl Harbor Day, December 7, 1941, I happened to be in North Platte, Nebraska, talking to a group of Japanese Americans regarding the necessity for organizing to stress our citizenship and our loyalty to the United States. None of us knew that Pearl Harbor had happened, and the first inkling that I had that something was amiss was when I was thrown into jail in North Platte, Nebraska.
I turned on the radio, and we heard Pearl Harbor bombed by the Japanese. My brother looked at me, and I looked at him, and I said, uh-oh, we are in trouble.
The FBI rounds up all Japanese aliens who could, for any reason, be considered dangerous, such as fishermen, leaders of Japanese societies, veterans of the Russo-Japanese War of 1905. There is little public hysteria. A boy writes, "In school, I am proud to say, everyone treated us as the Americans we are." On the West Coast, there are 41,000 Japanese aliens who arrived before 1924, when Congress stopped all immigration from Asia. By February 1942, 1,266 are in custody. The Justice Department is convinced the rest are harmless and should remain free. They all must register as enemy aliens, however. These immigrants, mostly elderly, barred from citizenship because they are Orientals, are the parents of the Nisei. The Nisei are citizens by birth. There are more than 71,000 of them, most under 28 years of age. As cameras are inspected, shortwave bands removed from radios, these frightened people are attacked by rumor. Nothing helpful to the enemy is found, but Japan is making frightening strides southwestward in the Pacific. Reports, all false, come from Pearl Harbor of aid to the enemy during the bombing. Enemy planes and scare headlines on December 8th are purely imaginary. But on February 23rd, 1942, a submarine does shell a refinery near Santa Barbara. The highest military authorities are certain the enemy does not plan an invasion, but behind the defenses, fear is screaming hate. Columnist Westbrook Pegler wants all Japanese under guard, and to hell with habeas corpus. Columnist Henry McLemore writes, "I hate Japanese, all of them." A spokesman for farmers charged with wanting to get rid of Japanese competitors for selfish reasons says, "We do, and we don't want them back after the war either." A general tells Washington of pressure from the best people in California to move all Japanese.
The general who asked the President of the United States for the power to evacuate was General John L. DeWitt, Commanding General of the Western Defense Command. And before a congressional committee, he said very emphatically that from his experience over the years as an Army officer, he knew that a Jap's a Jap, and a scrap of paper attesting to his citizenship doesn't alter that fact. Earl Warren, as the Attorney General of California, was the chief law enforcement officer for that state. Before the Tolling Committee in San Francisco in April of 1942, Earl Warren declared that the American-born Japanese was more dangerous to the security of the United States than even the alien Japanese. And this was because we spoke the English language, we understood the American ways. And since we were bound to help the Japanese invader, this made us more dangerous than even the enemy alien who happened to be our parents. Walter Lippmann, a very distinguished columnist then as now, noted in his editorial, rather noted in his columns, that one reason why the Japanese Americans and the Japanese on the West Coast were so dangerous was because there had been not a single act of espionage or sabotage on our part, because the Japanese many years before had organized us so carefully that we had deliberately refrained from taking part in any of these activities to call it on ourselves. And that when the Japanese invaded the West Coast, then we would rise up and aid them against the United States.
Abruptly in late winter, DeWitt orders evacuation of all Japanese from the coast. Stores, farms, homes are hurriedly sold. Lives are uprooted. The nation has three major enemies, Germany, Italy, and Japan. But only the Japanese are so treated. Where did DeWitt get the authority? 7 West Coast congressmen have asked President Roosevelt to move all Japanese, immigrants and American-born Nisei alike. The president vigorously approves. Move anyone, citizen or alien, as military necessity requires. Only a curfew is imposed on 80,000 German and Italian aliens on the West Coast, but the Nisei and their parents are moved en masse, and the United States now has 112,000 prisoners of war. Many Japanese Americans, to prove their loyalty, willingly move to inland areas, voluntary evacuation. They are met with violence and threats. Now, to protect them, he says, DeWitt orders all into assembly centers, racetracks, and fairgrounds. A Nisei who wrote and illustrated a book about the evacuation.
The heads of the family and the single persons were ordered to report and register, and we were given our family number and tags. We were told what to bring and what not to bring, and told what to wear for pioneer life in camp. We had 3 days and 3 nights to pack and get ready. Some of the things we left, some of the things we gave away, and some of the things we stored with the government. Baggages were heaped high on the sidewalks for blocks. Buses were lined up in the street for blocks. We lined up single file, paraded in front of everybody, and entered the bus. The guards were still standing, and the friends were waving goodbye to us, and the public was gawking. We crossed the Bay Bridge in silence, traveled several miles south, and arrived at the Tampere Assembly Center. As it entered, we saw heaps of baggages with family names dumped here and there. The bus drove in front of the grandstand, and we got out, and we were searched for contraband, straight-edged razor and knives and liquor. And then we went to the registration table and were assigned our stable 16 and stall 50. The guide then took us across the center field to our stable and stall. We went inside to the dark, dimly lit back part and saw two army cots against the wall. My brother opened one and I opened the other, and we sat in the dark looking at each other. By then it was 10 o'clock, and we decided we'll hit the hay. But it turned out so cold that we finally had to open everything in the bags and the suitcases and spread it on top of us. We could hear every noise, but we were so tired that finally, about 12 o'clock, fell asleep. That was our first night in camp.
In Hawaii, 3,000 miles closer to the enemy, with 1/3 of its population of Japanese descent, nothing like this occurs. What had the mainland Japanese Americans done? The Dean of Yale Law School, Eugene V. Rostow.
The basic idea behind the orders and the statute and the decisions made by the political and military authorities of the United States was that people of Japanese descent, American citizens of Japanese descent, were presumed, by reason of their descent, their blood, their ethnic background, to possess certain political ideas which were hostile to the United States. They were presumed to be disloyal simply because of their descent. Now, the basic rule of civilized society and of the legal system of civilized society is that men can be punished by the criminal law only for acts, not for thoughts, not for intentions, not for hopes or fears or dreams. Only acts. There was no evidence whatever presented by the military or by the Department of Justice, none, to support the hypothesis that there was danger to be expected or treasonable acts committed by the people who were involved and the people who were punished. These men and women and children were removed from their homes, taken into physical custody by military or paramilitary forces of the United States, confined against their will in camps maintained by the United States, even though they had no trials, even though they had no rights of confrontation of witnesses against them, even though there were no juries, no courts, no lawyers, none of the usual familiar protections of due process of law.
June 1942, Santa Anita Racetrack, the now president of the Japanese American Citizens League.
At the Santa Anita Assembly Center, 19,000 people were crowded into this one plant. Since the stay was supposedly temporary, many of us did not give much thought to anything organized. However, when the stay went beyond 2 weeks, into a month, into 2 months, things were quite chaotic, and we felt that unless some thought was given to some order, that people were becoming quite disgruntled, people were becoming rebellious. So some of us got together and decided to organize what we called a self-government, and we divided into various districts, had the individuals residing in those areas vote for their own representatives. This is how we were able to survive the 7 months. We set up libraries, we set up various activity groups. We had 88 softball games going on at one time. People were dying, people were being born. So this was quite a community of 19,000 individuals in one small area.
The evacuation goes on, even though the great American naval victory in the Battle of Midway on June 6th closes out the last remote possibility of invasion of the West Coast. 10 tar paper cities rise in deserts and backwoods from Northern California to Arkansas. The internees are transported hundreds of miles to barracks designed for young, unmarried soldiers. Infants born in captivity, whole families, are now hemmed in by mud, barbed wire, and guns. In this chaotic chow line environment, the immigrant domination of the family is weakened. The Nisei, English their native language, come to the fore, negotiate with the authorities, get status their elders cannot. food, clothing become institutional concerns, no longer family matters. Some people get a chance to do war work, like experimenting with synthetic rubber. Some make camouflage nets. Objections from private industry prevent other projects. When labor shortages press the country, the Nisei are permitted to help save the sugar beet crop. Schools go up. Pre-war Nisei are proportionally the best educated minority in the country. But on the West Coast, college degrees have often led only to jobs in fruit stands. Nisei doctors and nurses in the camps draw inmate wages, $16 to $19 a month. The urge toward harmony and beauty still lives, but one angry Nisei says, "If any Nisei thinks he is an American, I dare him to walk out of this prison." Early in 1943, the government wants to reopen the draft to the Nisei, resettle the internees. All in the camps get a loyalty questionnaire, which is clumsily handled. Many citizens reject the questionnaire to protest imprisonment. For a few, this eventually leads to giving up citizenship. But the great majority of internees want to be what they are at heart, Americans. Out of this turmoil comes the volunteer 442nd Regimental Combat Team. Many Nisei feel that Japanese Americans can never have peace unless they write a record of loyalty in blood. A Nisei who won the Distinguished Service Cross and lost an arm in Italy, United States Senator Inouye.
During our training, we were advised by our commanding officer that according to the official ruling of some of the officials in Mississippi, that while we were there in Mississippi training, we would be considered as white people. Therefore, we were told not to enter through doors that said colored, not to go to restaurants, to go through the white entrance to go to theaters, or sit in the front of the bus. It was a rather comical situation. Here we were colored because we weren't white, but yet in Mississippi, all of a sudden we became white folks.
I had with my Fifth Army in Italy many nationalities, 16 I believe, and I took in with me 5,000 Japanese American, referred to as the Niseis. General Marshall had given me instructions that as soon as I put them into combat to give him an immediate report on their capacity for fighting, their loyalty and all about it. Their first battle soon took place after we landed at Salerno, and I was utterly amazed at their fighting capacity. They were valorous, they were willing to give their lives readily, and I gave a glowing report to General Marshall and said, if you've got any more, send them to me.
The Nisei are dying for their country, but their families are behind barbed wire at home. When the Nisei GIs return, their USO is in an internment camp. And it is little known, even here, that 3,000 Japanese Americans, Nisei and immigrant, also are in the Pacific and dying there. With the 442nd's fame helping pave the way, by 1944, 36,000 internees take the gamble on resettlement. For many, it is the first step outside the little Tokyos of the coast. Chicago and the Midwest receive them warmly. Many never return to old homes, making new lives where they find them. Now in France, in October 1944, the 442nd is rapidly becoming the most decorated unit in the U.S. Army. It includes 2 battalions of infantry from the mainland, the 100th Battalion from Hawaii, field artillery, and combat engineers. Their motto is, "Go for broke." A battalion of the 36th Texas Division is surrounded in the Vosges Mountains near Bruyères. It will be the Nisei's most terrible fight. The Nisei saved 287 men of the Lost Battalion. Of these young men with Oriental faces who want to be known not as Japanese Americans, but simply as Americans. 1,800 are wounded, 140 more are dead. New York, the war over in Europe, the Nisei start coming home. Thousands, including women, have been in the Army. But on the West Coast, their returning families are being met with bullets and arson. California will land, but Caucasian friends come forward. Congress will repay, in part, evacuation losses. The immigrants will gain citizenship. The change, however, will take time. Senator Inouye.
I was finally determined by the retirement board that I was ready to go back to Hawaii. So I was shipped to California to wait for a transport ship to carry me back to Honolulu. While in California, I decided that I should do something to myself to prepare myself for reunion with my folks. So I went to a barber shop to get myself a haircut. But as I walked in, I was stopped by one of the barbers there. He looked at me and he said, "Are you a Chinaman?" And I says, "No, I'm an American." He says, "No, where do your folks come from?" I said, "They're from Hawaii and they're Americans also." "Well, where did your grandparents come from?" "They're from Japan. We don't serve Japs here." I was in my uniform on that day. I was a captain in the United States Army. I had 3 rows of ribbons to show that I had fought in the war, that I had been wounded several times, that I had been decorated by the President and by the Congress. But yet to this man, this barber, a man, a fellow American, an American that I had tried my best to defend during the war, had decided that I was not qualified, nor was I fit to sit in his barber's chair to just get a simple haircut.
On July 15, 1946, President Harry Truman pins a 7th Presidential Citation streamer to the 442nd flag.
Citizenship in this great republic of ours means much more than race or creed or religion. You fought for the liberties of the world along with the rest of us. I congratulate you on that, and I can't tell you how very much I appreciate the privilege of being able to show you just how much the United States of America thinks of what you've done.
The Nisei have written their record of loyalty in blood. But while winning their case on the battlefield, they have lost a case in court. In 1944, the Supreme Court refused to question the military judgment that a real necessity existed for the evacuation and the exile. It established for the first time the military right to imprison civilian citizens arbitrarily, even when civil courts are open and functioning. One dissenting justice said, "This principle is a loaded weapon for any of making a claim of urgent need." This loaded weapon is still a part of American law.